Hello and welcome. I'm really pleased at our inaugural Battlefield for Our Mind, we have Donald Campbell. So the Battlefield for Our Mind is a series where we focus on community empowerment for progression. And we will be having dialogues with our servant leaders. Battlefield for Our Mind involves an advocacy systems approach to quality, compassionate care for long-term conditions, taking into account a person's cultural, economic, environmental, social, and spiritual needs. Donald Campbell is one of our community wellbeing cluster champions. And our overall key words for this program are patience, compassion, resilience, endurance, and faith. Donald is based in Birmingham, but he works all over the country and all over the world. Donald, great to see you again.
Yeah, good evening, Rudy. Great to see you also.
I would like to start with about understanding the impact of serving within the forces throughout the United Kingdom and what it means from going from civilian to military.
Okay, having gone through this experience myself at age 18, I've since learned quite a bit about the military, arms, Navy, Army, Air Force. We're all different in terms of what we do and how we do it and why we do it. And as people, we engage ourselves in this depending on what we like. We may like the water, the sea, and the air. But initially, leaving as a civilian and going into these training and establishments, it actually changes you in many ways. And a lot of the ways it changes you initially is obviously mentally. And you could find yourself very, very quickly in situations that you're not expecting to face. And for instance, at the end of my basic training, trade training, I found myself in Northern Ireland. So from a civilian, within months, I was facing a situation that was quite mentally challenging. In other words, you're facing the enemy. And of course, what I also learned is the fact that being in the Navy, the Army, the Air Forces can be quite different. Obviously, the Air Force is in the air, the Army on the ground, and the Navy on the sea. But as an individual, depending on which one you are actually trained in, then your mental, physical being is likely to be quite different. So we're all differently affected accordingly.
So looking at the different branches of the Army Forces, Navy, Royal Air Force, Royal Marines, Submariner, and of course we have African and Caribbean young people and adults who served across all of those forces. Could you tell us about how you cope with being away from the family for a long time, and then how it felt when you then come back to the neighborhood and the friends that you also...
Well, yes. I can speak specifically about myself was in the Royal Air Force, but I've interviewed quite a few people who tell me their differences. And as for myself, I did travel many places, and family-wise, it really affects your family very much. And of course, yourself. Even though people might think you're away, enjoying yourself, it's not necessarily the case. And of course, your family back at home will feel it. And I'll give you, for instance, my young boy used to say to me, I have a headache every time you go away.
Mhm.
It's only when you go away I have a headache, because he was just feeling it, you know. And then, of course, when you're on away from home, however long that is, communication is not always what it should be, especially back in the day. So if you get a letter from home, it can be quite significant hearing from your family and then hearing from you. So it's very, very significant, the length of time you spend away, and it's very different for us all. You know, you've got the submariner is underneath the water for a long period of time. You've got the naval person on the ship, and you've got the army personnel away wherever they may be, and indeed the Air Force people away. So we all get that sort of lengthy time away from home, and it really does affect your family.
So how do you cope with the loss of that camaraderie? Because obviously that's an essential part of being out there with colleagues, depending on each other. So that fills a gap somewhere. But of course, when you come back to civilian life, can you give us some
Okay.
on that?
So in the military, it's very much team effort. You've got the army on the ground, the navy on the sea, and the air force in the air, as I mentioned before. But in a war effort, for instance, you know, you get the air force going in, hopefully, maybe to do reconnaissance and do what they've got to do. Now you've got a myriad of people to make that aircraft fly. So everything is a team. And then you've got the Navy on the sea, all together on that ship, camaraderie. And then, of course, the people on the ground as army, and you go in and you do whatever you need to do, but you do everything as a team. And it affects us all differently. Especially the army, they're probably more of a team than the rest of us, because they go in as a regiment, they fight as a unit. So therefore, when you finish at the end of your service, you'll probably find yourself back in Civil Street, in amongst a group of, as we say, civilians. You know, so you've gone from a civilian to military, back to being a civilian. And it's not always easy just letting go of your comrades and fitting back in. So mentally, it can be quite challenging. And it also depends on what scars you'll bring with you from wherever you served and however long you served. Yeah, as to how you're mentally dealing with that. It can be quite difficult.
Absolutely. So I know in your experience, you've been able to help some people who've had these challenges. Can you just give us an outline of how you have helped, and hearing those individual stories and what was
so what I've done is I've set up an organization. Sorry.
Go ahead.
What I've done is I set up an organization called the Forgotten Generations, and basically what I do on a regular basis is to try and find a lot of these veterans from World War I right up to today, and I interview them if they're willing to do so. We do about an hour's chat, and I call it a chat, because what I want to do, what I aim to do, is to get individuals to talk about their service, how they got on from the word go, and all the things they face, the difficulties, the challenges, the good times, the not so good times, the bad times. And I do find that when I talk to people about this, that it can be quite therapeutic for them. Just from the fact that somebody's engaging with them and talking about what they faced in times gone by, and indeed what they're facing now. So having done that with quite a few people, they tell me that they find it can be quite comforting. And indeed, sometimes it's quite challenging even talking about it, because it actually brings some of those memories back. But overall, those ones I've interviewed, not only just interview them, they've got that interview recording for themselves so they can actually share it with their loved ones. Because a lot of the times people don't know what has gone on fully. So they're able to then understand their brothers, sisters, uncles, aunties more after listening to their stories.
So could you give us an example where somebody has shared their story with you and then they have come back to you to tell you how they felt because they, maybe for the first time had shared that particular aspect of their life?
Yes, I've actually interviewed people who have come back to me and said that they feel like they're a part of a family now. Mm. Because as the forgotten generations, we've got a lot of over 100 members now. Okay. So once you get in an interview in, chances are you become a member, and then you get updated. So therefore, a lot of people who have been interviewed become a part of the member, so that members group. So they feel a part of. They don't feel necessarily alone anymore. Mm-hmm. The members group is not just military; it's mixed, both civilian and veterans, but mostly are veterans. So we do understand other veterans. Mm-hmm. So those veterans do feel somewhat at home once they get into the membership.
Excellent. And the reason, and you raised a good point there, is that you have the cultural understanding of the veterans, but also you also appreciate what they may have had to do and how it may have affected them, in the service as well now, back out, in civilian life. So what do you think our community can do about this aspect of our those who served, and of course there will always be a number of people who have served and that we don't know much about. So this is why we talk about patience, compassion, resilience, endurance, and faith. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I think we should try and recognize who we've got amongst us in terms of veteran when they come back in within our community. And one of the first things is to encourage these veterans to make sure that they're linked with the GP. Okay. Because what's important is that the veterans do not actually come back into the community and hide away, especially when they have mental challenges. Mm-hmm. So it is very important to actually link with your medical world. And we're trying to get an establishment with the GP as well, so that they do ask the questions, especially when they know that person is a veteran, ask certain questions, because a lot of veterans are very good at not speaking up. So they hide away what the issues are that's going on within them. So that's one of the first things. And then, of course, you're looking at making sure they're comfortable in terms of accommodation, family, well accommodated and looked after. Because if they got mental issues going on, and then they also have accommodation issues and family issues, then there's extra stress going on in them. We're trying to get we're trying to get them back into a comfortable world as much as possible.
Excellent. Just before we close, and you've touched on families, Rose Johnson is on here as well, and of course, and Rose because of the work that she's done with her veterans book, and you mentioned about family. So Rose, can you the focus, just so that we're clear, the focus of this initiative, Battlefield for Our Mind, is to say that our community has the solutions for addressing the issues relating to our mental health and our well-being, and we do have the people who have the compassion, the patience, the endurance, the faith, the resilience, people like Donald as what we call our servant leaders. But, you know, there are issues to be addressed from the family perspective. So if you'd like to just say a few words of that, around that issue, but I don't want to leave our audience with any feeling that we don't know how to take care of ourselves, because we do. And then we'll come back to Donald's with his final last words. Thank you.
Thank you, Rudy and Donald. I think everything that Don has spoken about, absolutely, and you, about that kindness, that resilience, that listening. But what I've seen is also a need for us to gather those resources and support the families that are of those veterans as well.
Absolutely.
Because they're very close to it. Sometimes the energy, the emotional investment also needs to be supported in that group who are supporting the veterans. Because the veterans, from my, looking on, having a couple of brothers who are veterans, they sometimes are reticent, aren't they, Donald, to talk about the experiences they've had.
Absolutely.
And therefore the strength amongst the group themselves is incredibly important, because those people understand quite a lot of what those veterans have gone through. But we mustn't forget the families around them as well, the love and the need. And you're absolutely right. We do know, and we have to look at ourselves in providing that support. But we must also share our feelings, and actually be willing just to listen. Listen with love, and that empathy and that caring is incredibly important in super resilient, to actually remember how amazing they are, and how that deep inner strength can grow and develop beyond the time in the service. And even many years, many decades later, there is still a need for that talking and listening.
Thank you very much for that, Rose. And you make a great
point you very much
on the who cares for the carers point in terms of compassion for families, because we can't leave out the carers, because they're an integral part of the recovery as well, and the everyday living of reality of life. So thanks for that. Donald, last word from you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rose, for that. Very good. I'd like to also say that we look on the other side of what we've been talking about, the caring and making sure accommodations. Well, we look at the leisure side of things. So we organize events where we can get our veterans and their family together. We've got, our annual ex-service personnel reunion, and we have several other events where, we come together, and, especially when we were able to banter, as military individuals, don't get in the mix of that. That's quite something, but it's very therapeutic, because we just let go and, and do what we do against each other. And for those moments, whatever you're going through, that's like put aside, and we just, so it's very important to have social gatherings where we can actually, understand each other and vent.
Excellent. Before you go, Donald, just tell us how we get hold of you, how anybody could get hold of you, contact details.
Yeah, so, well, thank you. So, yeah, the Forgotten Generations website is just that, theforgottengenerations.com. THE, Forgotten Generations with an S, .com. And you can see all my details on there in terms of my email, my contact, and you can communicate. You can also become a member and make sure that you can be updated on a regular basis. And we will thank you for that.
Thank you very much, and see you again soon. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Rudy. Really appreciate this.